Welcome to today's Medical Device Marketing Podcast. So today I'm here with Hannah and Oscar. Welcome, Hannah and Oscar.
Hi, thank you for having us.
So we've got a really interesting topic today. What do people need to think about when they're thinking of working with an agency? And you might think this is a really weird topic for us to be talking about because we're an agency. But actually, I think there's a lot of things that you need to think about when you are going to work with an agency to make sure they're the right agency for you. Because actually, we are not the right agency for everybody, although we totally are the right agency for certain companies with certain projects. So I really want to go through today the top probably 5 things that people should think about when they're starting to work with an agency. I think we can talk about it quite uniquely because we are an agency and we understand the inner workings of how everything works. So one sort of thing that probably we fit into the most is specialization. So when we're thinking about specialization, what should people think about? Hannah, start with you.
So specialisation, I guess, means lots of different things, but are they in the industry? Do they do the types of projects? You know, what are they specialised in? So it's kind of multi-dimensional, that one. But specialisation, as you mentioned, not everyone is going to be good at absolutely everything. And it's finding the person that's going to do your project the justice and, you know, deliver on what you need it to do. So, you know, we're medical devices. That's what we specialise in. That's our baby. We all get quite excited off mic. We were talking about all sorts of medical things and we genuinely care about it. Yeah. But actually, if you need, you know, one type of project that doesn't need that specialist knowledge, maybe we're not the right person for you. Maybe an agency that specialises in that one particular project might be. So that's what specialism means, or, you know, multi-dimensional. Yeah.
And sometimes actually I think as well, it's good to have external perspectives. You know, we are so ingrained in medical devices. That is all we do. We are standout experts in it. But, you know, sometimes it is good to have another agency that potentially have a different viewpoint from a different industry, at least to, you know, compare and contrast opinions and viewpoints, because there's every agency have their blind spots, right?
Totally. And actually, even things that we do, and I'm, you know, maybe this again surprising we say this, but even things we do, actually, you know, we might do it as, you know, something in addition to all our medical device marketing experience. But actually, you might be able to find another agency. Not only are they really specific in that as well, but actually they'll be more cost effective in that area too. So it's also looking at what budget you have, what projects you have, and how can you spend that the best. And actually, in all fairness, we're very open to being very honest around that as well, because I think that's really important so that you know exactly what everybody is specialist at. So that's really good, understanding what your project is and what the specialization of the agency is so that you know they're the right people for you. And maybe actually a great way to look at this is what's on their website, because I mean, you know, you'll see very quickly what their specialization is by looking at that.
If they have some, you know, for me, it's I don't want to say the word red flag, but if an agency claims to be able to do everything, how well can they do everything? So I think, be very critical when you're looking to partner with someone. Have they listed every single thing under the sun and claim to be an expert under it?
Because actually you can't do that. Yeah.
And we work with quite a few clients that have multiple agencies, and they really bring that strategic view of it going, actually, I use, you know, Podymos because they're great at really understanding my medical device, you know, illustration. They want it really specific, but actually they use others for, I don't know, medical copywriting, because that's their specialism. And, you know, there's lots of different things. So whilst we do it as part of, you know, everything that we do. Some agencies might focus on really one specific thing and they may be, you know, better for you.
And actually in medical device, there's specializations in different areas as well.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing to think about. You know, there aren't that many specific medical device agencies, but those that are all look at different areas as well. So it's a really big topic, specialization. But, you know, to what you were saying as well about working with other agencies, actually for us, we do really enjoy it when other agencies come in because it challenges us in how we think as well. So that's another interesting area to it. Okay, so what about onboarding? I think that's another really interesting thing for people to ask their agency about how this is going to work. And there's several reasons for this. Oscar?
Yeah, I think for me, a good onboarding is vital. As at the beginning of any good partnership is understanding why they've approached in the first place, what they're trying to achieve. Because quite often they can, you know, be going about something that they don't even realize is not even the right direction. They might come to us for one thing. We sit down, have a good, you know, in-depth, you know, could take an hour, 2 hours sometimes, that first meeting with a client, to understand their previous history, what's worked, what their customers like. You know, prior to that meeting, we've gone away and, you know, we've researched that company, you know, in depth, so that we come to that meeting very, very prepared. So I guess my first thing would be, if your agency turned up and they are not prepared, they don't understand your medical device, almost as good as you, and sometimes better, I would say, just because of our expertise, it's so much easier for us to pick it up. That's certainly a red flag. And I think that understanding what their current capability is, how many people are in their team, understanding what the strengths of and weaknesses of the people in those team, because sometimes we can drop in quite nicely as like an extension to that team, but we don't, if we haven't gone really into depth in what that currently is, then we're not going to fit in very well. We really need to understand their capacity.
But there's other aspects to onboarding as well that we sort of need to think about, especially for any company actually. So whatever agency you're working with, whether it's a specialist medical device marketing agency, or actually it's more of a general graphics agency or something like that, onboarding is really important because, things like how sure are you that they understand your brand? Yeah. So it's also things like that. And I know we do a lot of other stuff as well, like clinical data, things like that. So how can you be sure? I suppose it's by understanding what their onboarding process for you looks like before you sign anything. Yeah. It gives you a good idea of saying, actually, yes, they're going to have a good grasp of what my technology does, and they're going to have a good grasp of what my clinical data is, what my references are, what my trademarks are, what my brand is. Because if they don't have that onboarding in place, and again, this isn't specific to medical devices, anything. Yeah. If they don't have that onboarding in place, the likelihood is, or the worry could be, that you're going to end up having to fill that gap. And the whole reason you work with an agency is for them to help you to develop your not necessarily develop your creativity, but to do projects while you do other business critical activities. So the last thing you can be doing is hand holding. So I think it's really important as well that you ask up front. It's everything we're talking about now really is asking up front. It's like, what do you need to know before you sign on that dotted line with an agency to say, yes, I'm going to move forward?
Yeah. And a process should be easy, it should be simple, but it should also be thorough. If an agency is not asking you for your brand guidelines, for your references, all of those things that you've mentioned, are they ticking all of the boxes? Are they going to take your brand, and is it in safe hands? Because working with an agency can be expensive. If you did it internally, you might not have to find that budget, but you haven't got the expertise. What an agency does is really give you access to a huge amount of resources that you haven't got yourself, but also frees up your time. And I think that's a really big thing, that that transfer of knowledge should be easy but thorough. And then you can trust that agency are going to run with your projects, in the best hands.
And actually, that's a really good point as well for multiple agencies, because if you are working with multiple agencies, that works really well. It's a really good idea depending on what you're doing. If they're not going to onboard you correctly as a client, then you're going to start getting variation, and that's going to come back on you. And then you're going to have to sort that out, and that's going to take time. That's going to be a pain, all these things. So actually, even proactively talking to agencies, you might really like an agency, but their onboarding isn't exactly what you think. Maybe actually helping them and saying, you need to do this, you need to do that, if you really want to work with them, to make sure you don't have problems down the line, I think is really important from an onboarding perspective. There's a very common term, which I'm sure everybody listening to this will know, called project creep. And actually, if that happens so your agency will likely say, we have, you have X number of revisions or something like that. So it's really important, what we're saying, to know that up front and know exactly what that looks like. And so if you do go over that, or what's going to cause you more money? Yeah.
And also what's included, what's not included. Because it's, I think from all our sort of personal experience, you think you're getting something and then you go, oh, but where is? And they go, but that's not included. And you go, well, I really thought it was. And that's really tricky, because either you haven't got the budget, you're disappointed, and all of that sort of stuff. So it's understanding pricing, but it's also what's included, what's not, what's the repercussions. So, as you say, if I go over my revision rounds, what do we do there? How much do I get charged for that? All of those sorts of things.
No, totally. But again, these are all things up front. So actually, you can manage these all as well. Because again, if you really like an agency, you really want to work with them, then there has to be some responsibility in the sense of actually, let's ask all those questions and let's find out. Because agencies will be happy to answer all these things. They might just not have thought about it to put it in all their materials up front. But actually, and also with things like briefs, to your point, what are you going to get? What are you not going to get? So actually, if there's any I think probably a really good message here is if there's any grey area anywhere or fogginess in your mind, clarify that, because that will come and potentially cause you an issue later.
Yeah.
And that's bad. The agency don't want that. You don't want that, because it breaks down relationships in both ways. So actually just being as transparent as possible and finding out that information up front will be really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Look at their marketing. The agency you're going to pick, their marketing is their CV to you. If they're not good at getting across what they do, what their expertise are, and they're not compelling enough, they can, but I'd be very hesitant to believe that they can be effective for you if they can't be effective for themselves. Explore their website, explore their marketing materials. How, have they got their branding down? Have they got their messaging down? Is their website a good user journey? What happens when you sign up to their newsletters? Do you receive good content? If that's not in place for them, how can they claim to get it in place for you?
Okay, so this has been a really interesting discussion about the things you should think about before you engage with an agency. So the questions you should ask them to make sure they're the right specialization for you, so they have the skills to do what you want them to do, and that's really what they do on an everyday basis. They have a good onboarding process so that you're confident mostly that they're going to understand your brand, they're going to know your clinical references. And again, this is a really good indicator of if they have that specialization. So it might be in photography, it might be in video, it might be in medical device, it might be in fast moving goods. But you'll understand from their onboarding process how much they understand your industry. So that's really important. Transparency in pricing. So, what is going to cost you money? So if you go over, what does that look like? Because the last thing any of us needs, we have fixed budgets. Everybody has fixed budgets. You need to deliver a certain thing in a certain time. So if suddenly your agency comes back to you and says, actually, you've gone over these review periods that I didn't totally tell you about, and now it's going to go up by £10,000 or something, that's not a situation you want to be in, but that's something you can really stop being in by asking these questions up front. So that's really important. But I think to bring the whole thing together, you're ideally wanting to work with a really popular agency, right? That is really busy all the time.
Yeah.
And that's because that's where everybody is going. So what the final thing I think we really need to talk about is capacity, and how do you make sure that your agency has capacity for you and you as you're growing, because they can be the best agency in the world, they can be the most specific, but if they can't if they can't deliver your project in the time you want, then that's an issue.
So I think the only way you can really understand an agency's capacity, firstly, you have to ask them. You have to ask that question, do you have capacity for this? I think you need to ask them deeper questions. You have to ask, how many people are on their team? How many, let's say you're I don't know, you've approached them for a website project. Do they have programming in-house? Do they have graphic designers in-house? Do they have videographers in-house? Because if they're outsourcing everything, that's where not only do costs go up, not only does project creep happen, but realistically, you're at a second level of whim of that freelancer being taken up by other agencies and stuff. So you need to get a good understanding of how many people in that company, how many people are you actually getting dedicated to you and your team and your project. And only then really can you make a decision if you think this agency has the capacity to deliver on the project.
And also for me, I think most people start with one project, maybe with an aim to expand and bring more marketing to you, but you're never going to give one agency, your whole 2024 budget, for instance. You start small, but actually if that's been really successful, which you would hope it would be, is have they got capacity for my future plans? This is where I want to get to. I'd love to work with one or two agencies or even three, but actually I'm bringing someone in-house or into the mix because of their specialization and the skill set they bring. But if this goes well, have they got time for me later on? Because you spent all of that time onboarding. You want to know that they've got time for you now and in the future as well.
And also what would happen, because at the moment they're the size they are. So actually we had a really interesting question recently from a client who said, how many working hours do you currently have available in the agency? How many are taken up on an average month? And how many of those hours are free? But I think it is, isn't it? Because it then actually gives them an idea of what your flexibility and capacity is. But I think the other thing is, as we grow, if we do, in 2 years, if we do keep doing more and more projects, how will you develop your team or how will you cope with that? So what is the plan for the agency moving forwards? Because again, you don't want to have to keep re-onboarding new agencies. If it's working, if it's not working, totally go find another agency. But if it's working, you want to keep with that agency as well. So what's the one thing, if our audience are looking to engage with an agency, what's the one thing that you think is the most important thing they need to ask before they sign the contract?
I really liked the part you just brought up there, which is what is your current flexibility like hours-wise? I haven't thought of that before, so I think that's a great one. I'd recommend that.
Yeah. For me, it's not necessarily a question, but it's a feeling. You know, have they answered all of my questions? Am I comfortable? Is there any grey space? You know, are there any areas that I don't feel have been covered? And if there are, either ask them. And if they're not answered satisfactorily, you know, that's not going to change. If you're worried now, these things won't magically kind of come good. So if you're not 100% comfortable, you haven't got your answers, ask more questions until you are, or the decision is not to go with that agency. That's kind of the takeaway for me.
So it's really transparency.
Yeah, it is.
So you need to be 100% comfortable that the person you're going to engage with is the right company for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent. What would mine be? I think very similar to yours, Hannah. It's ask as many questions as you physically can.
Yeah.
So have no grey areas whatsoever. And just they should be able to answer everything because this is what they do on a day-to-day basis. And it works for the ongoing relationship. So leave no stone unturned.
Yeah.
Fab. Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much for having us.
It's a pleasure. So we hope this has been useful for everybody who's been listening, and join us on next week's podcast. This episode of the Medical Device Marketing Podcast was brought to you by Podymos. If this conversation sparked any new ideas for you, or you want to transform your medical device marketing approach, then our door is always open. Visit www.podymos.com and explore a treasure trove of information about medical device marketing on our Learning Centre. Or, better yet, get in contact with us and speak to one of our expert marketers, as they're as passionate about medical device innovation as you are.